I think we're now live. So as people start to filter through, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Feel free to engage with the chat and tell us where you're dialing in from. We've actually got Paul today is up in Scotland and he's had some snow. So if you want to share if you've had a sprinkling of the white stuff as well, that'd be fun to see. I'll just give it a couple of minutes for people to file in and see the numbers go up. Yeah, wet in Bristol. It's the same here. I'm in southeast London and it's sort of grey and a bit drizzly.
Same.
Welcome everyone. Okay, I can see the numbers have steadied out at, we've got around 70 people dialed in, so I'll kick off. A very big thank you to everyone for taking time out of your day to join us this morning. I think we could all agree that wellbeing was already at the top of many organisations' agendas, but we're pretty confident in saying that it's now more pressing than ever. How we support ourselves, our friends, family and colleagues over this winter is just so incredibly important. So I am exceptionally excited to be joined by a panel at the forefront of wellbeing at work. We've got Paul Devoy, who's the CEO of Investors in People. We've got Afrifa-Tchie, Head of Culture and Wellbeing at Mental Health First Aid England, and Rhonda D'Ambrosio, Founder of Mental Health and Recruitment, and myself, Beth Samson, the People Lead at Investors in People. I'll be hosting. You may notice that we've shuffled the panel around a little bit since we started promoting this webinar. Sadly, Joe from Blue Moon wasn't able to join us today, but we wanted to make sure you still had a really diverse, exciting range of views on the panel to hear from. So, interesting fact, MHFA England were the very first organisation to achieve We Invest in Wellbeing, which is Investors in People's latest framework, which measures how well organisations manage the physical, social and psychological elements of their people's wellbeing. I know I speak for myself and also for the rest of the panel when I say we're all super passionate about wellbeing, both personally and professionally. So it's my great pleasure to be hosting this conversation this morning. And we'll keep it just nice and relaxed, quite an informal style. So please do add comments, tell us what you're thinking about what we're saying in the chat function. But if you have any questions that you'd like us to address in the Q&A at the end, pop them in the Q&A section. And that gives me a nice summary to work through as we go. So without any further ado, I'll dive in. And first off, I want to hear from you. How are you feeling today? And how are you feeling about your organisation? So if you could launch the poll, excellent. And this poll gives me a little live counter of how many of you have voted so I can watch the numbers creep up. Okay. So I think for me personally, I'm probably on an 8 today. I had a good sleep. I've had sort of average amount of coffee, a healthy quantity. So I'm feeling good. And of course, I'm excited about this conversation.
I'm probably on a 7, Beth. I didn't have a great night's sleep. I woke up a few times, but other than that, I'm okay. So it's amazing how sleep definitely impacts how we all feel.
Yeah, it really does, doesn't it? How about the rest of the panel? How are you today?
Yeah, I think I'm probably about an 8. I did have a good sleep, but I just think just the greyness and wetness outside just is not helping.
Yeah. Well, I'm an 8. I'm feeling quite Christmassy because where I live in Scotland, it was snowing last night. Not a huge amount, but there was enough of a cover in my snow to make it look Christmassy outside. So, although it was a bit, the only downside of that is it was too icy to go for a run this morning. So that's the only thing. So I felt like my dog was taking me for a sleigh ride, pulling me along the street in the ice.
I think that's why I'm not up there on the 8s or 9s, because we're a bit late putting our tree up this year. And normally you think December, I know everyone's different and a lot of people have been putting it up, their trees up early, but I just feel everywhere else I go and see it's very Christmassy and it's not in our house. So that's made my mood a bit flat for sure.
Yeah, we put our Christmas decorations up on Saturday, and normally I would have said November, putting Christmas, that's just not on. But I think this year, everyone's wanting to, well, apart from anything else, there's nothing else to do.
But But I'm like you, Rhonda, I haven't plucked my tree yet. I'm doing it this weekend though, because I was like, no, I have December, even though like they have to be December, and it's like the first Sunday, so it's fine.
I think as much as anything else, it's having a change of scenery, isn't it? I think when you're in the house such a lot, just putting some decorations up gives you something new to look at. Awesome. So I can see we've now got the poll results up. So we've got a good mix of people. We've got a couple of people who are feeling sort of in the 3 to 5 range. Maybe not having the best of days, but hopefully through the course of this conversation, we'll give you a little boost. And then we've got a good spread of people, and we've got an average of an 8, which kind of mirrors what the panel was saying. And in terms of how confident you are that your employer will be able to effectively support your wellbeing through the winter, again, we've got a bit of a spread, a couple of people in the 1s to 3s, so hopefully you'll pick up some tips today. And then more of a kind of leaning towards the 7s and 8s with an average of 8. So fantastic. Gives us some interesting basis for our conversation today. And what I'm going to do now is just go in with the kind of question of the moment, the hot topic. Why should organisations be focusing on wellbeing now more than ever? And does it matter that it's winter? So I'll go to the panel. Who wants to answer that one first?
I can go first. Yeah, no, I think it is important more than ever, because I mean, we've already just spoke about the weather and how that impacts us. And I think especially when, you know, the clocks have gone back, it gets darker sooner, it does impact people's well-being and just perceptions of things in a different light. And we are still working from home predominantly, still very much either a hybrid or different way of working, which is not what we class as what we would say normal ways of working. So I think it's really important, especially I think also leading up to the end of the year, considering what we've all been going through for 2020, it's almost as though that, you know, there's something significant around just finishing off the year as good as possible, but also preparing for next year in a better way, because we will still be in the winter months, and actually also probably a bit darker and a bit colder too. So yeah.
Oh, thank you. Rhonda or Paul, any views?
Yeah, if I can add to that, I think, you know, we've been very fortunate in the UK to have experienced a pretty phenomenal summer with really good weather from April onwards. And of course, dealing with the lockdown and the results of the pandemic the way that we did, you know, for those of us that did have an outside space, and even for those of us that couldn't, but could get out and, for instance, do a run, as Paul just mentioned, you know, in the good weather, you're not limited in perhaps the same way. So when we look at the fact that we are faced with some restrictions, I know that they've been eased. We've not only got sort of all of the darkness, the coldness, the gloom of winter, but we've got those additional restrictions in terms of the freedoms that we perhaps enjoyed earlier this year.
Yeah, yeah, I would agree with all of that. The only thing I would say slightly differently is we didn't have a good summer in Scotland.
I'm so sorry, Paul.
Sorry, Paul.
And Beth will testify to that, because we used to have our team Zoom huddle every day, and everyone was sitting in London sweltering, and I'd be in Scotland miserable because it was raining outside. So, but I think the point's still the same though. As I said earlier, it was snowing up here this morning, and normally I would be out at sort of 7:30 for a run to start my day off, and I couldn't because it was just too slippy and too dangerous. But I still forced myself to go out and take the dog out just to get some fresh air. So I think there's a combination of things that's hitting us at the moment. We've got all of the various lockdowns across the country to varying degrees. I mean, if you live in the Outer Hebrides, there's virtually no restrictions there at all. But you know, where I am in Pullman, we've got quite strong restrictions, even although our rates are actually quite low, and all the surrounding areas rates are really high. So we've been kept indoors and everything's shut. So if we have a high percentage of people working from home, maybe a lot of people on their own, maybe feeling isolated, I think there's a big responsibility on employers to really make sure that they're looking after the well-being of their employees, because, you know, loneliness, isolation, lack of getting out, lack of sunlight, lack of being able to go out and socialise with friends, that's quite a cocktail of things that will have could have a negative impact on people's well-being if we don't look after each other.
Yeah,
absolutely. And I think from a personal perspective, I'm always someone that has a massive boost in energy in the spring, and then as we go through to autumn, the days get shorter. I do often tend to feel quite sort of lethargic, and I go into a lower mood. And I know obviously there's been some research done on seasonal affective disorder and how the light levels and things can influence or trigger that. But I think, like you say, Paul, as employers, it can be challenging to manage changing of seasons if people are starting to feel, less energetic, because obviously that has connections to motivation and performance. So from the panel's point of view, how would you say that kind of looking after well-being or building a culture of positive well-being in an organisation can connect through to results in the business?
Yeah, I'm happy to go first on that. I think there was like a really robust piece of work done in the Thriving at Work report that the government commissioned a few years ago, and the evidence there was pretty irrefutable. There's a direct link between people's psychological well-being predominantly and their overall productivity and performance in the workplace. So if you don't have employees with good well-being, they won't be as productive, and therefore your organisation won't have the results that you're looking for. And at the moment, when people are in challenging times, the more that the employers can look after the well-being of their employees, you will definitely get a dividend from that, because their productivity and performance will be improved as a result of paying attention to those issues and not just taking them for granted.
I talk a lot about brain chemistry and tapping it into performance management frameworks and leadership frameworks, and how if you can tap into our naturally happy chemicals like dopamine for motivation, oxytocin in terms of trust and transparency, serotonin with the feel-good factor, and endorphins with regard to how we pain when we think of endorphins, but there are other ways to access it in the workplace. If leaders can tap into those things as part of their management frameworks, what you get is a happier workforce. And going back to what Paul said about thriving at work, we know that we lose billions in lack of discretionary effort. So I always struggle when businesses still don't understand the business case and the return on investment in putting a wellbeing framework in place or looking after their staff's mental health, because the numbers from the Deloitte analysis on that was £1.50 to £9 for every pound spent. So it's almost like a no-brainer. So I think not only is it absolutely vital, but it's necessary to make people happier. If we improve people's lives, as we say at Mental Health and Recruitment, then we also improve business.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with both you, Rhonda and Paul, what you said. I think there's also an element very much around how we create those cultures and environments where people do feel that they are being supported for their well-being, but also are empowered to look after their own well-being. And I think it comes down to very much, employers, line managers, people managers really understanding their teams and knowing their team dynamics and their team individuals to be able to support them and figure out what best ways to do that. Because at the end of the day, we still need to be productive in our organizations in order to still be sustainable. And I think there's a huge element, coming back to your point around isolation, Paul, around when you're talking about healthy performance, it's also about the healthy relationships that you build, which also impact people's emotional well-being. Especially throughout the year, but more so when they have other impacts like seasonal changes and we're still having to live with pandemics. So I think that I would add those two things on top of that, is actually making sure we do empower our employees, because there's also an element where sometimes motivation, I guess leaders also sometimes think about, well, how do I motivate my people, which actually is an element that we need to do, but actually motivation is also a responsibility of self. So how do you empower your people to feel motivated, but also to be able to talk when they're not feeling great or things are actually impacting them? It's the conversations, right? It's the well-being conversations that need to be had, whether it's one-to-one, as a team, or as a group, to create those environments to make sure performance is still key, but it's the heart of it's about people's well-being that's been driven by that, and inclusion for that perspective.
Absolutely. I think that's a really important point. And I think we've noticed at Investors in People the power of relationships, and actually what a difference it makes celebrating the good things that happen and making sure that there's that space for people to connect with each other. And like you say, have the well-being conversation, but even as simple as just genuinely saying, how are you doing? What's going on for you? And then having the time and the focus to listen actively to that without perhaps looking at another screen or typing at the same time. So what advice do you have as a panel on how people can provide support to each other at work as we go through the winter?
I'll jump in. we had a long pause then, guys.
We're all too polite, aren't we?
We are.
We're so British and so polite.
I think we hear about it a lot, and in some respects it sounds cliche, but I think it's incredibly important. We do need to be checking in on the people around us, and not just doing that at a superficial level, but asking the question once and maybe asking the question twice. Because, you know, what we've learned from the remote working piece is that we are lacking and we're missing that human connectivity and the read that we get from being face to face with people and understanding people's body language that we're so naturally tuned into. And the reason why you know, Zoom fatigue or remote working you know, acuity is a big thing at the moment is because, you know, we have to work so much harder. And I think, you know, I'm certainly seeing that individuals are now moving away from wanting to do the video calls and the video conferencing, jumping on a Zoom or Teams. And I've had at least 5 or 6 people in the last month say, can we just actually do a good old fashioned phone call? So I think it could be very easy for us to, you know, not check in with people or to sort of just send a quick message and do it as a cursory, polite checking in. But I think we need to really make a point of meaning it and being very present in the moment, like you said.
100% agree. I think there is, we have to be more proactive, even more so, to make the effort to check in. And also, I think, you know, we need to look after each other and use our empathy and emotional intelligence. Okay, maybe not all of us do have emotional intelligence, but you can build on that. But I think the key thing is around empathy. And Beth, you mentioned around just asking questions. I think that you have to go deeper into asking those questions. So it's more beyond how are you doing today? It's around, have you had a break? Do you want to take a minute? Have you had lunch yet? Have you, you know, like asking those questions so those individuals really do feel that you are checking in and wondering what they, you know, asking how they're doing. Because often I think when you ask the question, how are you doing? It can be very easy to say, I'm fine, when I'm not really. Yeah. So again, it comes back to understanding your relationships with your employees, whether it's your teams, you know, your peers, whatever it is, but truly going with that extra step beyond to ask the right questions so that people feel that they are truly you're truly concerned with them to want to open up. And I agree, Rhonda, you have to keep asking, you have to keep checking in. I mean, we have introduced walk and talk meetings, to your point, Rhonda, because sometimes we just don't want to be on. Yeah. And if you're not sharing screens, why not? And it's a great way to get people out, especially in winter, earlier during the day. So at least if it's a 30-minute meeting or 25-minute meeting, they've got some activity in their day to look forward to, and they're away from their laptops and computers. And I think there's something also about giving people permission to be able to look for other ways to connect with people, whether it's a coffee break or something else that doesn't necessarily have to be virtual. So yeah, I just want to.
That's so good, Amma. I think also giving permission that people can do an activity and, you know, and leave their desk. I think that's really vital.
Yeah. And it all plays into the whole notion of flexible working, doesn't it? That because everyone's working from home, my view would be that it shouldn't just be that you're sitting at your desk at home from 9 till 5. I think we need to look at, you know, if people need to get a bit of time when it's light to get outside and then they can do maybe they start a bit earlier or work a bit later when it's dark, to give them the opportunity to get as much light and fresh air as possible, then, you know, if that can work, I mean, I'm not saying that should be to the detriment of how work is organised, but if that can be accommodated within how the work needs to be organised, then we should give people and empower people to have that flexibility. And that's something that we've always championed at Investors and People. I don't care if a member of our team does their best work at 4 o'clock on a Sunday morning, but want to go and pick their kids up from school. It's about finding ways to identify when they can bring the best version of themselves to work and accommodate the other commitments or needs that they have round about it. And again, if an employer gives that flexibility because of reciprocity, the employee will want to reciprocate that back. So it should be a win-win. It's not about someone kind of swinging the lead or taking advantage. Most people, the vast majority of people, don't do that.
Yeah, and I think actually more so that we talked about outcomes over presenteeism when we were in the workplace, and I think it's really vital now. So because we are always on, and Rhonda, you mentioned about working harder. We are working harder, but actually the question is what we're producing still worthy of what we need to produce? Yeah. I think there's very much around being smarter in the way you work, being transparent and open and honest if there are things that are just too much to actually reevaluate and review the situation. But I think it should be based on outcomes, because at the end of the day, so long as you deliver what you're supposed to deliver and you deliver it to the standard, and how you manage your diary, and again, it comes back to empowering people with having the realistic view, obviously, of what needs to be done, to your point, Paul, about, just making sure that there is that balance between productivity and etc. But at the end of the day is now, because I think some employers feel the need that people are working from home, so you're always constantly available. No, it should still be the same premises.
Oh, yeah.
Let's base this on outcomes. We are hiring adults. Let's treat each other as adults and actually have those conversations where we talk about managing workloads, how it's going to work, but also the reality of the fact that we will work in peaks and troughs where there will be some demands and sometimes where it's higher to deliver on stuff. So then we review the well-being perspective. Okay, well, what do you need to be able to do that? Versus actually, well, we can't do that because it's, we shouldn't even consider it.
I think to that point as well, Emma, there is a perception around flexibility when we talk about working from home, and employers can be guilty of assuming that, well, that you're at home, you've got all the time in the world, but we're not factoring in how it supports our well-being and our mental health when we're in a conventional environment and we have those natural breaks throughout the day when somebody says, oh, come and grab a coffee, or let's get 5 minutes, or you're just walking around up and down. So I think there is a piece of around the guilt that needs to be addressed in terms of how employers are communicating to their teams and their workforces to encourage the kind of like what it is you've done there, the initiative at MHFA, to this is what we're going to do, this is what it means, so that individuals aren't feeling guilty and don't feel like they can't step away from their machine or their teams. And if it's outcome focused, then absolutely, yeah.
Isn't it interesting though that since lockdown happened in March, the whole flexible working agenda, which was gathering a little bit of momentum, has, in my view, has moved 10 years in sort of the first 10 weeks of lockdown. Employers agreed to things that they potentially would have been very reluctant to have agreed to before. And it actually worked really well. So if you do trust and empower your people, somebody said to me, if you have to, and I know a lot of companies have been trying to sell these software tools that measures the number of key depressions that people are doing, so that Big Brother can measure how busy you are, and you're not sitting watching Homes Under the Hammer when you're supposed to be working. That's, to me, that's coming at the problem from the wrong side of the lens. If you don't trust your people, why did you employ them in the first place?
Absolutely.
So for me, you should start with a basis of trust, and it'll only be a tiny percentage that will not do their end of the bargain. And if you do trust and empower people, they will be more productive, and you will create a more happier and positive environment, because you're allowing them the autonomy to balance their well-being with the needs of the organisation.
Yeah, Natalie, Narelle's, that's my eyes, I haven't got my glasses on. Narelle in the chat's just said there, again, if you exactly that, you should be managing people, managing performance in the right way, and then that ceases to become an issue for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think sort of reflecting on my experience, one of the hardest things has been actually to give permission to myself to have peaks and troughs as well. I think before all of this, I was definitely someone that preferred being in the office rather than working from home, because it was kind of part of my mental setup that being at work was doing work. And so I felt like when I went home, I'd done a full day. And it took quite a while for me to make that mental adjustment to actually give permission sometimes to myself that maybe I wasn't most productive on a day, but then the next day I could be super productive within a shorter concentration of hours. And it took me a while to kind of like harness my natural energy peaks and troughs and be aware of those. And then also like work with my manager to help them understand that and how my work could be structured to make the most of when I was kind of in my best thinking space or in my best kind of collaborative space. Calls for me in the afternoon work much better than the morning, for example. So I think it's flexibility in hours and also flexibility in how you structure and plan your work too, to make the most of those energy levels.
Absolutely. I think also employers need to identify and understand that there are individuals that absolutely thrive working from home and in this manner, and there are individuals that really, really don't, and it impacts them and their well-being as well as their performance. And that comes back to, Amma, what you said earlier about tapping into those individual drivers and motivators and how well we know our staff and how we're going to get the best out of them.
I 100% agree. I think I truly believe that one huge element around healthy performance is around those healthy relationships. And whilst I understand that people managers and leaders are probably really busy trying to do strategic stuff and everything else, but actually, if you really take the time out to carve out those conversations with your teams one-to-one or as a team and give them that empowerment they need, you actually help, you could support. I agree with you, Rhonda. Not everybody works well working from home. Because also, I mean, kids are back at school now, but when we're back in March, it was a whole load of chaos happening in people's houses, bless them. But also, you know, you were sharing spaces. If you were sharing houses with housemates, you were sharing rooms. So people that have the luxury or are blessed, as I like to say, that to be able to have space to come out of their homes and be able to create rooms where you can do work, it's one thing versus the other. But also for other people, they found a great balance. At the end of the day, it's around those conversations, what works well for you. But also there might be times where you might have to have those right conversations about, okay, well, at this moment in time, we need to achieve something. So how do we do that collectively, collaboratively together? It all does boil down to relationship, because as much as we are working very hard, if people feel that they can't speak to their leaders, their line managers or peers or anybody, it all becomes self-imploding. People keep things to themselves, and that added amount of pressure actually impacts them more on their well-being than having to actually work hard to deliver what they need to. So I mean, I can't emphasize hard enough where the connection between people and making sure you're checking in is important.
You know, what's very interesting there as well is something that you know, we don't talk about as much and has come up actually in our survey. So earlier this year, Mental Health and Recruitment, we did a survey to our industry, to all levels of staff, not just the business owners and directors, but also the sales force and the back office support. And you know, we asked a number of questions around perception and you know, operational support in business, as well as how people experience their own mental health. And the report is imminent. I should be finished writing it this morning, but I wanted to do this instead. That one of the key takeaways that's come out is expectations. You know, if we're not setting expectations properly with our employees, we have to really understand that there will be a disconnect in terms of achieving those outcomes.
Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry, Paul. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, I think what the situation we're in now in terms of how work is organised with the pandemic puts a huge amount of responsibility on managers, not only to engage effectively with their employees, but manage in different ways that they probably haven't been trained or don't have a lot of experience of doing. And this is a stat that I always quote. I was speaking at a House of Lords event about wellbeing a couple of years ago, and there was a GP there. And he told me that 80% of the people who came to his surgery with a mental health issue was work-related. And the majority of that was to do with their relationship with their line manager. So, you know, that was a normal day-to-day business activity. That was before any of the challenges we've had this year. So I don't think we place enough emphasis on training and supporting our managers to support their team members.
I wholeheartedly agree with that, Paul. Yeah.
And there was a study done by the Chartered Management Institute a few years ago, which found that there's over 2.5 million accidental managers in the UK. That's people who have been put into management positions who have never been trained to be a manager. So we have this kind of paradigm that, you know, you would never let anyone become a lawyer or a car mechanic or a nurse or whatever without them having been properly trained. Yeah. But we seem to think that anybody can pick up being a line manager. And I think, I don't think I don't say that in a way to criticise managers. I say that in a way to support managers, because we don't invest enough in our managers to help them be good managers. And therefore many people are struggling. And let's be honest, you know, people are amazing, but they're also quite complicated creatures. And it takes a lot of skill to manage people effectively. And never has that going to be tested more so than now, and more so through this winter. So, you know, my plea wouldn't be just about, let's make sure that we do stuff for the general population of the employees about wellbeing. We need to support the managers to manage employees better, so that, because that will have the multiplier effect. If you get that cohort right, that has a multiplier effect, because they'll be better able to support and look after their teams. And I don't think in the UK, all the research shows that part of the reason their productivity is low is that the kind of mean level of capability amongst your management cohort is not as high as in the other G7 countries, because we don't invest enough in it. We just have this idea that it's something you just pick up, but it's not. It's really, really hard.
But I think you've raised a really good point, Paul, because I think, and more especially with the professions you spoke about, they actually are experienced technically. So actually, when you think about it, with lawyers, doctors, whatever, they are trained technically to be experts. And that, and also there's also care of duty a lot aside with that. But so I think when we hire managers or promote managers, we promote them on the technicality of their expertise, but we don't nurture the people element that they need to. And also when we think about it from a career perspective and career growth opportunity, there is something around a conversation around the individual contributor perspective, which is the expertise of technicality versus the people management perspective. So I agree with you. I think we do need to look at our manager cohort, especially to see what support that they need. And actually, when we are looking to either hire or promote or whatever it is, managers, we pay attention hugely to the people factor of that. So whether it's, and also I think the training needs to be blended. So it needs to not just be, let's stick them in the classroom and train them, because most of the stuff that we learn is on the job, right? And most of the experiences we have is on relationships on the job. So there is very much a blended way of how do we support, again, to empower managers to learn and think about what attributes as leaders they want to be from a people element, but also give them the support that they needed to upskill and equip them to be better managers, both as in technicality, but also in people management.
That people management piece ties so nicely into boundaries as well, because you typically find that, you know what, we're all humans, and we're all, most of the time, if we're not big thinking and we're thinking about friends, family, people we care about, we want to help and we want to support. And I think the challenge for managers out there is being able to support in a way whereby there is a boundary there and they don't absorb that emotion. And I've seen this working with organizations that have sent some fantastic, very empathetic people off to do first aid training, and actually those individuals may not be the best people in the business to support the workforce. And you know, I worked with a client and who said to me, actually, what we've done is our first aid, our mental health first aider, we put her on a 4-day week because she needs a day to download and to process. And for me, that's a bit of a flag. And I think that ties into equipping people in the right way, because again, what we see in the recruitment industry is that intention is there, and the report is telling us that it is, or the leaders are saying it's a wider topic for the strategy. However, when it comes to translating that into action that supports wellbeing and mental health, there's a disconnect. So absolutely, Emma.
Yeah, actually, on your point on setting boundaries, I think I gave a webinar a few months ago to our mental health first aiders, and we had a conversation around boundaries, because one of the things we do train our mental health first aiders is to make sure that they do set those boundaries, because you automatically assume a huge responsibility of empathy, and that kind of sits with you. And we always say to them, make sure you're looking after your own mental health well-being, because you can't pour out of an empty cup. So setting those boundaries in those relationships, but also knowing when to have time out, when you need to recuperate, re-energize, and also be able not to feel guilty if you need to hand off to someone else because you can no longer sustain or support that individual. So these are all tips and well, not criteria, but tips and techniques that people do need to learn, especially line managers, around setting those boundaries, but also in that managing the expectations, those boundaries also need to be set. I mean, I always recommend that line managers or people managers do come on our training for
Yes.
first aiders, because it actually helps you think about things differently and think about different ways to be able to support your individuals. So.
Do you think as well, Amma, that the size of the organisation has something to do with that? Because, you know, you're right, I've done the training and, you know, I really thoroughly enjoyed the course. And, you know, if you're perhaps in a slightly larger organisation where you're not as personally connected to people, it's easier to put those boundaries in place. If you're a SME and these are people that you might consider friends, or you just, again, you're outside of the learning environment, in the real environment, you have to be quite disciplined in putting those practices into place. So,
I agree. I think larger corporations, obviously, the larger the size, obviously, they tend to even work in sort of mini organizations anyway when we talk about larger organizations, because the reach is so wide that you have the scale up to have according to whatever department, team, etc. you need. I think when you have a smaller business or SME, which is driven forthrightly by family, a sense of family and a sense of care that way, I do believe that it's a little bit harder, but I think that's more so when you need it. And I think and I'm not saying regardless of the size, I think irrespective of the size, that whole thing around boundaries and managing expectations should always be at the forefront, and revisiting those boundaries and managing those expectations should always be a consistent, constant thing that you review in your relationships. Otherwise, if you don't, things will be taken for granted. People will take things for granted, and then that's when things begin to unravel.
Yeah,
I can't agree with that anymore. I think as a kind of people HR professional as well, that's such an important message to hear, because there is a danger that you take on the world, and if you don't continually kind of keep reviewing your boundaries, like you say, you can get to a point where actually it's detrimental to yourself, but also the people that you're working with, because like you say, your cup's empty, you've got no more to pour, and then you're not being helpful anyway. So it does actually make sense sometimes proactively to push things back, or like you say, hand over to someone else, so that it gives you more kind of time and resource and that space to recharge, so that you can continue supporting and helping in the best way. I'm aware of the time. We're coming up to 20 to 12. So I just want to do a kind of a push to the audience. If you've got questions for the panel, pop them through on the Q&A, because we will do our best to rattle through as many as possible in the last 15 minutes. But before we do that, I just wanted to kind of go back to the panel and ask you for a quick fire round of your top 3 practical tips for winter wellbeing. Maybe it's for people as individuals, or for managers, or for organizations, but just a kind of takeaway summary. So who wants to go first?
I'll go first, I don't mind.
Okay, thank you, Paul.
So when we've developed a wellbeing framework, and we've put a huge amount of research into understanding what are the key ingredients of wellbeing overall, and it's psychological, physical and social wellbeing. So I think we need to make sure that any wellbeing strategy that you develop as an employer looks at all of those 3 things, and not just just a fruit bowl on a Friday. That doesn't just work. There's a brilliant quote by somebody that I talked to at Mental Health First Aid England: "You can't out yoga a bad boss." So you can have these different benefits in place, but if you don't have the fundamentals around psychological, social and physical wellbeing, your wellbeing strategy won't work. And then my second tip is related to that, and I think I mentioned it to you earlier. For me, you've got to invest in your line management community, because they're probably getting it both ways. They're trying to look after their staff, and they're getting pressure from their manager above them, because most managers have managers too. So really investing in that community, make sure that they've got the skills and capability to look after the well-being of their teams and to look after themselves, because being a manager in the current context, we're asking a huge amount of them, and we need to give them all the support they need. And then the last one is more a kind of individual thing. I think over the winter, it's generally why we all put on a bit more timber, is to try and make sure that we get out and get fresh air, and we do the things like the walk-in meetings. We organise our work to try and get as much natural light as possible. If we're feeling down, talk to somebody. don't bottle it up. And being a bloke, and a Scottish bloke from a council house, I'm a classic example of the kind of people who would bottle it up, and and it comes out in the wrong ways. So making sure you communicate and talk to people if you're feeling down, getting exercise, getting out there and getting fresh air, and making sure that we give the managers the support that they need to look after their teams and then look after themselves.
Thanks, Paul. Great tips there.
I would agree with everything that Paul said, but what I would also add is involving your employees in the campaigns that you're planning. So recently I pulled together a mini hack for us to think about what we wanted to do for our festivities in the build up to Christmas, but also to reboot our Wellbeing for January. And I think there's a sense of ownership again and empowerment when you get people together collaboratively to think about, on top of what we're offering in terms of the activity pieces, so which is like the usual sort of get together and keep them connected. When they feel that they are inputting to their own well-being, they have ownership of it in terms of getting volunteers to deliver on those activities, it becomes again more so for the people by the people in essence. So I would always say that if you are looking at your campaigns and initiatives, involving your employees in that, to come up with ideas and suggestions and also to lead on it, and supporting them where you can is a great way of doing that, because people then do feel a bit more connected. And I also think, I can't say enough, managing healthy relationships, building on that, making sure that you do have those wellbeing check-ins, not just in your scheduled one-to-ones and team meetings, but where appropriate, where you can have sort of social, coming back to the social element that Paul mentioned in the strategy, again, making sure you're connecting that and just being proactive and leading with empathy on a lot of this is actually quite helpful. So yeah, so echoing everything that Paul said, but I'd add those additional pieces to it.
Thank you. And
Super
Rhonda,
stuff.
your top three?
I'm so worried that we'd all have the same stuff. So this is wonderful. So to tie into almost the leadership and the employer piece, the thing that I would say to complement what both Paul and Emma are saying is communication and transparency is absolutely vital. If you're looking to drive a change within your business, and it's a significant change with regard to starting to talk about things that you may not have been talking about previously, that level of change can create uncertainty, and uncertainty is what we know fuels anxiety. So it's making sure that you factor in some of that when you're considering the well-being of the entire workforce, because it does make people a bit nervous, especially in a year like we've had this year. I guess the big one for me that you can use for yourselves, your teams, or anyone around you really, is about leading with compassion as opposed to kindness. I'm a really, really big fan of kindness, and I'm definitely in the Be Kind brigade. But with compassion, that kind of focuses and points to intention. And it's a lot easier to intend to be compassionate and kind and supportive than it might be to take the action of being kind. It sounds very, very easy, doesn't it, when we say just be kind, but we also know that in a practical sense in the workplace, other things get in the way, such as policy and performance management. But if you can have conversations and lead with compassion and tap into that empathy, then that will go quite a way with regard to the people that you're talking to. But also when you do it to yourself, it'll really help you, hopefully, from beating yourself up. That self-care element, whether you are a leader, whether you are a business owner, whether you're an employee, is absolutely vital as we go into this time of year and we go into Christmas. I think the other thing that I would always say is, I've got a few here, so I'm trying to pick the final one. I'm going to keep it really, really practical for everybody listening. Winter is really, really difficult. This is a very unique Christmas compared to others and Christmas period. And I think it would be very, very easy to look at the things that we don't have. And I would urge everybody to consider what you do have, to acknowledge the things that are good, that you are grateful for. Gratitude is ever so powerful. And when you are feeling low and when you are feeling down, if you can think about, it might not be the same as it usually is, and we may not be able to see the family that we would normally see. There are going to be some good things happening around you and some fantastic people and opportunities that you may not have met previously. So those are mine.
Yeah. Rhonda, I just want to add quickly to that, actually. I think coming to the point around gratitude is also remember not to be hard on yourself. Yes. If you can make it through the day, you've made it through the day. And whatever you haven't done today, you can achieve tomorrow. So having that, again, I think that self-care and self-awareness and not letting perfection be the enemy of good is also something to keep in terms of your gratitude moments and just remembering.
We're our own worst enemies.
Yeah, Fern Cotton had a great quote. I don't think it was her quote. I think she was quoting somebody else. But yeah, a flower doesn't bloom all year round, and there's a reason for that. You know, it blooms at certain times, but it needs the rest to properly bloom when it's time to bloom. So, you know, that stuff about, you know, giving yourself a break and not being overly critical of yourself all the time. And I think that'll come when we come to one of the questions that's been posed around about people worried about redundancy. I think there's something in there around about that.
Thank you for those top tips, panel. I think they're a great mix of the kind of bigger questions to think about, but also some really practical things that we can do as we continue to motor our way through the winter. So I can see we've got some good questions that have come through. So I'll open this up. We've had a question come through from Gillian saying, I completely agree about checking with staff. However, obviously managers are human too, and we can't solve challenges for our people. How can we encourage everyone to take responsibility for themselves and to take their own small steps? So I guess that's a kind of question around empowerment.
I think it comes back to, again, what questions you're asking and how you're having the conversations with the individual. What managers tend to do, and I think a lot of leaders tend to do, is assume the responsibility that they have to have all the answers and they have to give all the answers and they have to know what they're doing. And actually that sets you up more for failure than anything else. I think there's an element also to, it's almost like a coaching, and I think someone mentioned it on the chat. You have to have that relationship where you're coaching the individuals. There are some things as a line manager that, yes, you do need to take and see how you can support and find the answers too. But again, it's not all the time that you have to have the answers there and then. So there's ultimately, again, that relationship building where there might be some things that you might need to take away, think about, and come back to your next session or chat with the individual, but also give that individual some things to think about. So it's a two-way conversation where you are solving it together, or empowering that individual to think about it. So I would say approaching it as a coaching type skill set where you are asking that individual questions for them to provide answers to, but also to think about different ways around, as well as giving them some advice, would probably be a good way to start that. And that comes back to the empowerment piece.
That's a great answer. Thank you. Does anybody else from the panel want to pitch in on that one?
No, I'll let Amita. I thought she covered that.
I just thought exactly the same. I nailed that there. I don't think I've got anything more to add.
All in one. So another question that's come through. I think this one really resonated with me actually. We knew that the winter would be hard with general anxiety and money worries, and we've pushed our EAP and managers are talking to their people. But we've seen people struggling, afraid to share their worries, and even one person sectioned. We're now heading towards a 2-week Christmas shutdown where we'll lose sight of people. Any thoughts on how we can help?
You know, I think you're not the only organisation that's feeling some of that. And, you know, EAPs are great. They're there, they help people. But you're right, sometimes EAPs can be a disconnect to, you know, you as a unit and as an organisation. I think it's potentially looking at ways in which you can help them proactively, so providing proactive support around building adaptability and resilience, because if you can give people those tools, we know that that will impact you know, their mental health in a more positive way. So there are so many things out in the market, and one of the things that I do outside of mental health and recruitment, which I kind of give my time away for free, is I provide a wellbeing solution. We use apps. Now I'm not going to pitch my app because I think that's terribly uncouth, but there are plenty of apps out there that can help you do that and can give your guys something to tap into. You know, ours is based on micro learning, so giving people very small bite-sized activities that they can do every single day, so it removes overwhelm and it keeps them focused on building new skills. So I would suggest have a look out there, you know, find something like that if you can, but if not, look at the things that you can do that don't cost anything, that might make a difference to people. You know, connect with them in different ways. You know, the check-ins, the videos, there's so many resources out there that could help you. I'm sure that Paul and Amma have got lots more they could add to that one. Yeah,
I mean, I think again, I'm sort of a bit of a broke record, but as a line manager, I think you've got a degree of responsibility, understanding, you know, what's going on for an individual beyond just being an employee, about what's going on in their life outside of that, and almost having a kind of risk assessment of the people that you think are at risk over that over that period, and then coaching them to make sure that they've got the right support in place. I mean, Beth can speak about it more eloquently than I do, but we use an app called Thrive that has been really popular. I don't know if, Beth, you want to mention a bit about that as a tool that we use.
Yeah, I think it's similar to the point that you were making, Rhonda. It's almost about making sure when people go away for that festive break that they've got something in their hands, and by in their hands I mean probably on their phone, where they can access support when they need it without necessarily having to go through like the employer channel. And like you say, there are lots of apps out there. We use Thrive because it's got a live coaching function, so you can actually kind of connect and talk to a person at the other end.
I know the guys at Thrive very well. They're a fantastic bunch, and yeah, the coaching and the fact that it is focused on mental health, and it can help you, can't it? It can help you diagnose potentially conditions and link you in. Yeah, it's a nice piece of kit.
Exactly, and it's got some good kind of preventative activities as well that you can use for positive thinking, etc. So I think that would be kind of our tip. That's what we've put in place to support people outside of work, and just making sure that where you have resources, they're really accessible and quite straightforward to use.
Sorry, I'm laughing. Apologies, but I don't know if you just saw what I saw, but someone popped up on the screen. So I wasn't laughing at what you were saying. Apologies.
I did see him appear. Yeah, I wasn't sure if that
was. I saw Simon appearing. Yeah.
We've got a guest at the end.
It's a start. We've got a late star guest coming in.
Yeah, late star guest. So apologies if it looked really bad me laughing, but that was right. I just couldn't help. As you can see, I naturally am a laughing person, so I don't think that's what's. But yeah, no, I agree. I think that any apps, basically just signposting before you close your offices for Christmas, suggesting what people can do in terms of additional resources, but also it's a decision as a manager. If you have great relationships with your team and you are happy for them to connect with you over the Christmas break, absolutely. I think, there's the open door policy. It depends on how open you want that door to be. So, but I say again, I think there is that whole thing about respectful personal time or whatever it is. So I think, as well as signposting to additional resources, apps, books, whatever it could be, again, connecting with people in a different way. And then, if you want to have the door open or the phone open also for your team to contact you, then that's something that you should have that conversation with. But yeah, I think, because we just don't know what's going to happen, but so long as people know how they can reach the support that they need, that's the more imperative thing.
Perfect, thank you. And while we've been on the topic of kind of using apps to support teams, etc., we've had a question come through from Jake saying, does the panel have any recommendations on how to monitor the mental health of a large workforce if your HR department is small? So I suppose technology is one of the things that can help us gather kind of insights.
Sorry, go on, Rhonda.
For me, it comes back to some of the culture and engagement that you would do with your workforce on hopefully a regular basis anyway, the check-ins that you may do and the surveys that can be used, especially for a larger workforce. I think if you are using an app, a lot of them come with the reporting piece. But I think the thing that I always say to companies is remember that mental health is a very, very personal thing. And so what element of reporting would you want to do to monitor your people's mental health? You have to get that right as part of I think a wider strategy piece. But the kind of standard employee engagement, checking in with people, is this something that you are doing in your business anyway? Because that psychological safety piece we know ties in very, very clearly with the conversations people may wish to have. If you have individuals in your workforce that are struggling and you are typically, or you haven't been an organisation that talks and supports mental health and well-being, even though you may want them to talk, we know that often they don't.
I echoed that, and I think what I was going to add to that was more so the channels. So I guess the question is what are you monitoring and why, and what are you reporting on and why?
Yes.
If you're a large scale organization that has a small HR team, yes, you could use software. If you have an EAP system, you could ask your suppliers to provide you with regular reports to understand what are the key themes that are coming up that people are contacting them for, to then be able to adopt your wellbeing strategy or your people strategy in a better way to service your people and your workforce. But I agree, if you're not having the conversations, if you're not creating that culture of environment where people feel that they can actually talk about it, then having all the reporting is not going to help. I think as well as check-ins, I've brought in the key things around the channels to be able to talk So again, it's a personal thing, as Rhonda says. Some people have to feel comfortable enough about it. Some people can be quite open. So are you providing channels where people can talk about it anonymously? Are you providing channels where people can have it in forums where they talk about it with their peers? Where are you, what culture are you creating that enables people? Again, it comes back to that supporting people, but empowering them to also know that they're responsible for their own mental health and well-being. So how are you enabling the shared stories, the shared experiences to happen for that reporting to be quite organic? So there is the kind of technical reporting and monitoring, but then there's the creating that culture where people are sharing those stories to enable that stigma to be broken and people to actually have that. And actually it's more authentic and it's very much in real time too.
Yeah. I think the other thing I'd add to that is that if you want to get your strategy right and make sure you're doing the right thing, you do need the data, and you do need to really understand, because it's easy for us all to anecdotally, based on our experience, and saying, well, we should do X, Y, or Z. So that's why I think, you know, having the ability to get data, so we offer a diagnostic against our framework that can help organisations understand where they currently stand, so that their action plan can actually be built on real data about what the real issues are. But then I think the key thing that I think goes wrong with surveys is if you haven't followed that through with actions that are tangible, that people see that things are changing on the back of them having given their opinion. Quite often people give their opinion and nothing ever seems to change. And that's when organisations lose credibility about the authenticity of their intent, that they want things to get better, because they don't follow through on the actions afterwards and don't monitor and measure and be transparent about the changes that they've made and how effective that they've been.
So I've got one last question, which I'm hoping we can rattle through really quickly before we close off, because I think it's a really important one. So someone submitted this anonymously, and they've said the current situation has left many people feeling that their jobs are potentially at risk, and many places have already had a round of redundancies. What would you suggest as good methods for supporting a team who are inclined to overwork out of fear of redundancy selection process?
Yeah. So I'll go first, but I think that's a completely understandable reaction for people to take, is that because they'll feel that if there's 10 people in a team and there's only 5 jobs going forward, then they're competing with their colleagues to actually to secure their position. But it's probably a false endeavour, because if you overwork and become tired, your performance will go down, and you'll not be as productive, and you'll make mistakes, and you won't be bringing your best self to the table. So there's an element about individuals getting support to manage themselves through that, and I think the employer's got a really big responsibility to be really clear about what the criteria is that they're using, and that the level of working long hours and all of these things that are not healthy are not part of their criteria. So there's a big responsibility on the employer to do the right thing and not take advantage of that situation, and also to support their employees and give them the messaging that if they look after themselves, they will perform better, and it gives themselves a better chance of being selected.
Fantastic. Thanks for that one, Paul. Any insights on that one, Amma or Rhonda?
I again agree with what Paul's saying. I think there is something around ethically downsizing and being very transparent in that. And I think the communication is quite key into that development, because I think if people think if I work hard enough, I'll still keep my job, and they burn out and they're still let go, imagine what that detrimental effective impact have on that individual. So I think it's very clear, it should be very clear as to why you are having to downsize, and to actually be transparent in terms of why it's happening and the steps you'll be taking to, again, think about and consider things, and so that employees understand that it's not them personally, and that it's not that the fact that they have to work all the hours that God sends. So I agree with Paul. I think that there definitely needs to be an element around just the well-being. And again, it's coming back to working smartly rather than, continuously. And I think it's up to, again, responsibilities of line managers or people managers to make sure that that the people don't feel that that's the need for them to think about getting their job safe. So I'm waffling a bit, but I think that that's the additional piece. I think the key thing is around, if redundancies are on the cards, is for leadership to think about it, how they do that ethically, because you can do that ethically, but also to be very transparent with the communication, so people are kept up to date and understand that it's not a personal decision, but the business case behind the reasons why, so that they don't adopt that culture of constantly working hard and being on.
Yeah, I think in my experience, the kind of employment law and the legal requirements of a redundancy process are almost a bare minimum. And I think if you're responsible for planning how it will run, you need to build on that with the whole piece around communication, engagement, and also apply the wellbeing lens to the experience as well. I think one of the most powerful things that I've been told in kind of association with redundancies is always it's the role that's being made redundant.
Yeah.
It's not you as a person. Like, these are hugely valuable people potentially that you've worked with for years. So that's something that kind of helped me with that. Any final thoughts on that one, Rhonda? We're coming up to time, so.
No, I think the guys covered it. Mine was transparency and communication, which Emma talked about beautifully. So
Fantastic. Well, I think I speak for everyone in the audience when I say a big, huge, ginormous thank you to you as a panel. You've shared so much useful advice and practical guidance. So thank you very much. And thank you to everyone that tuned in as well, taking time out of your day.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Yeah. Thanks everybody for joining.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody.
Take care.
Take care.